Chad Daybell is going to spend the rest of his life as it is behind bars. That is until his execution. But what does that really mean? What will life be like for Chad Daybell? Well, on today's program, we're going to hear from an expert who will tell us how life will be for Chad Daybell behind the bars. That and a whole lot more on this edition of Charlie Crimebuster. Yep, it's what some people are calling, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this exciting edition of Charlie Crimebuster. Today we're going to have Mike Cantrell. He is the host of the Prison Officer Podcast. And he's going to be telling us about how life is going to be for Chad Daybell. You'll get to meet Mike in just a moment. But first, let me welcome you to the podcast. We appreciate our listeners who join us week after week and become a part of the Charlie Crime family. Hey, if you'd like to reach out with a shout out, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me, Charlie Crimebuster, at gmail.com. That's Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the program, well, please go right on over to peacemakernetwork.com. And there you'll find out how you can help those brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. Yep, we're talking about law enforcement, first responders, and the brave men and women of the military. That's peacemakernetwork.com. And if you'd like to find out more about the podcast and about what we do at Charlie Crimebuster, go to charliecrimebuster.com. And before we get through with this housekeeping and get into the interview, I got to ask you, have you been to the YouTube channel yet? If not, go to YouTube and just tag it Charlie Crimebuster, YouTube at Charlie Crimebuster. Find out about what's happening on YouTube. It's exploding. And when you get there, don't forget to subscribe. We need your subscription to help us launch this new effort for Charlie Crimebuster. So, getting all that housekeeping out of the way, it's time for us to introduce you to a guest, Mike Cantrell, who happens to be, he is my friend, the host of the Prison Officer Podcast. Tremendous podcast. You're going to hear more about it in just a moment. James, take it away.
Well, welcome everyone to Crime Talk with Charlie Crimebuster. We have our special guest, Mike Cantrell. He is the host of the Prison Officer Podcast at www.theprisonofficer.com. And Mike Cantrell has been in corrections for over 29 years. And he's recently retired from the Federal Bureau of Prisons as the Chief of Office of Emergency Preparedness. He's a master instructor for pepperball. He also has certifications as an instructor for firearms, less lethal, disturbance control, and breaching. He is considered a leading expert in the area of correctional breaching, and during his career, he has led special response disturbance control and canine teams. He is a correctional consultant specializing in the use of force and physical security. He is a writer, content creator, and a speaker on leadership and crisis management. He's also the author of the Prison Officer Podcast Job Guide and a collection of short stories and poetry, Monotonous Chaos, The Ramblings of a Prison Guard. His articles can also be seen regularly at correction1.com. We'd like to welcome you. Welcome, Mike.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited.
Mike, I've been excited about having you on this podcast ever since I met you.
Yeah.
And I liked him right off the bat, James, because he has the name Cantrell.
Right.
Cantrell.
There you go. I see it.
He has a good name now, because I know a guy by the name of Cantwell, by the way.
I do too. Interesting how that works.
Mike, it's such an honor to have you with us, man. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I talk you up everywhere I go. When I run into correctional officers, I had the opportunity, James, to meet Mike when he was actually coming to Volusia County, and he was training our correctional officers.
Uh-huh.
And I got to meet him, and we both found out that we both had podcasts. So
Nice.
we had a really good time talking about that. Mike, to start off with, tell me, did you just like, were you out playing cowboys and Indians and said, "Hey, I want to be a correctional officer," or how did that come to be that you decided you wanted to be a correctional officer?
It took me years to decide after I was hired. Actually, I was working overseas as a cook, and I came back home on leave, fell in love with a wonderful lady who I'm still married to 32 years later, and decided I needed a job. And I saw a deal in the newspaper said, "Cook wanted, Missouri State Pen." So I sent off the stuff, and about a week later, this lady calls me. She said, "We don't need cooks, we need COs." I said, "What's a CO?" I didn't know what kind of cook that was. And so I needed a job, and she said, "Well, we can teach you." And I'd been around, I'd never been around prison work. My dad was a firefighter. All of our friends were firefighters and cops and, public service of some sort. So I kind of felt like I was getting into public service, and found out later it's not quite the same, but that's what got me started.
Oh man, I as I've talked to you before, I really admire correctional officers. I was out on the street, but the great thing I thought about what I was doing is I got to drop them off and let you guys take care of them for the rest of the time. I just had to handle it for a few minutes, and you guys were there all the time. Hey,
Yeah.
You said, I guess this was a state prison that you began your career in.
Yep. I started off at Missouri State Pen, which is in Jefferson City, Missouri. It's still open. If you want to, you can go up there and go on tours. I think on Halloween they're still letting you sleep in the prison overnight.
Wow.
I'm not doing
wow.
that. But,
For free.
It was at the time it was called the bloodiest 47 acres in America.
Wow.
Yeah, it was rocking and rolling. We had staff assaults every other day. It wasn't unusual to have an inmate death every month, maybe twice a month.
Wow.
So it was a really crazy place to start off at. But you learn a lot real quick, and you make really good friendships real quick when you have to trust everybody like that.
I bet you do.
Wow.
A lot of our audience are true crime buffs, and they hear that this guy's going to prison and this guy's going to jail, and a lot of times they can't really, in their own mind, they somehow do not comprehend that there is actually a difference. There's a county jail and I guess state and federal. Can you briefly let our audience know the differences between those?
Yeah, and there's not only differences between those, there's differences between jurisdictions and states, and
Right.
Usually when a person first gets arrested, they're going to go to jail, and that's temporary. Right. They're not serving a sentence yet. Most of the time, you may find that out on a reservation or a small county where they do time for a little bit, but long time's not going to be done there. And then the step up once they're sentenced is probably going to be either state or federal prison. People ask me, what's the difference between state and federal? Well, federal has a bigger budget. So,
Yeah.
They have more stuff. And federal kind of gets to pick and choose who they prosecute. So states are left over sometimes with some of the ones that the feds don't want to prosecute. And I know that may sound bad or wrong, but it's just that's the way it is. So you have, and inside those states, you're going to have 5 levels of prison. You're going to have camps, which may or may not even have a fence around them. And these are guys that are going to work in the community. You might see them on the side of the road, like that. You're going to move on up to mediums with a fence, or minimums with a fence, and then mediums. You may have high mediums, and then, of course, maximum security. A lot of states have one step above that, which is either going to be, a supermax or a special management unit. And that's where you're going to house gang leaders, the worst of the worst, death row sometimes. You're going to see that at those areas. And the feds kind of follow that too. They have 5 levels of prison. I mean, a lot of people, they make fun of, the getting fed time because you're going to be out there, on a beach somewhere. It's not quite like that. But they do get to walk around and play volleyball a lot more than you'd think a criminal would. But and then we go all the way up. Our supermax is in Florence, Colorado, and that's where the worst of the worst is.
Right. Well, we've been doing a series on Chad Daybell. He just recently got convicted and given the death sentence, and I think a lot of our people would like to know what kind of daily routine will Chad be involved in as he awaits all these appeals and this sort of thing that he's going through.
So if he's a convicted death row inmate, then he's going to be sent to wherever death row is. Now, death row and what is segregation are the same, with the exception of death row, they're going to be there until their sentence is overturned or until they go to the execution chamber. Segregation is where they send them for maybe 30 days if you get in trouble and stuff. But both of them have the same kind of day. They're going to be locked down 23 hours a day. They're going to get to come out 1 hour a day and go to usually a recreation cage that'll be separated from other inmates. It may be chain link between them, but they'll be separated. They're going to get fed 3 meals a day. They're going to get 3 showers a week where they come out and they change their prison, their inmate clothes, and they get soap, shampoo, toothbrush, just like everybody else does. We modify some of it to keep them from, making weapons. The toothbrush they get is going to be about 2.5 inches long, so that they can't take their weapon out of it. But they get the same stuff that everybody else would expect. And then they have access to law library for several hours a week if they're working on a case, which means you just put them in this room with a bunch of books. Now it's digital, so they get put in a room with a computer where they can bring up all the stuff they need to look up for their case. And a lot of those guys are going to spend a lot of time in the law library because that's all they're doing is fighting their case all the time. But the rest of the time they're in the cell. It depends on where they're at. Anywhere between a 6x8. Some of those cells might be a little bigger. Some might be a little smaller. A bed. Most of them have a radio, toilet, sink. They got access to books and writing materials, and they'll get phone calls a few times a week.
Well, being a writer, will he have the right to be able to publish anything that he writes in there?
He will, but he will have to go through some legal processes. You're not allowed. I think if he writes his fiction that he's been writing, there's not much that they're going to say about that. But if he writes anything about his case, you can't make money off of your case. You can't kill somebody and then write a book about it and make money off of that.
Right.
But I think if he sticks to his fiction, I think he can probably have that published, and he'll probably get the residuals put in his commissary account.
Okay.
I think probably all of our people might be thinking about this. When you were talking about the law library, I thought about Ted Bundy, and he was studying, there, and jumped out the window and escaped and all that sort of thing with that. But the thing I think that probably surprises a lot of people is Ted Bundy ended up being a father while in prison. And, a lot of people can't get their arms around that. How can you go to prison and be on death row and end up fathering the child? So can you give our people any insight on how that happens?
And is that part of the 1 hour that they get?
It can be more than that. But first step is you have to get convicted in a liberal state. Right now, I think it's California, Washington, New York, and Connecticut are the only 4 that still have conjugal visits. And California is the only one that has conjugal visits for death row. But they usually have a cell or a different, an area that's away from everybody. And sure enough, if they have a previous relationship, in California, if they have a previous relationship, in the other states, you have to have been married. California doesn't require that. So
interesting.
If you have a girlfriend at this time, then yes, there's a possibility that he could have a conjugal visit in the California penal system, if approved, and all that stuff. But the first step is getting convicted in a liberal state. Yeah.
I think it was Idaho, right, James? That this trial went in. So I don't know what Idaho was, but that I appreciate that. I honestly did not realize that different states would allow it and some wouldn't allow it. it goes without saying that if I've got to tell you this, Mike, anything happening in California would not surprise me at
No,
this point.
no, absolutely not. Me neither. Yeah.
uh, now, this kind of goes with what James mentioned a moment ago. If he's out there writing these books like he's been writing,
hmm
um, would he be able to continue to form his little cult and church and that sort of thing?
Um, we have religious freedom inside the prisons,
Right.
so yes, he'll be able to sit with other people, and yes, he'll be able to talk about his opinions and that kind of stuff. They will not allow him to preach or anything like that, which he's not going to have much access because he's going to be, in death row.
Yeah.
As an inmate who might be in general population, first off, it has to be a recognized religion, and the courts have fought over that for years. And your readers probably don't know, but that's not just Christian, Muslim, Jewish. That's Wiccan. It's
Right. Satanism.
Odinism. Yeah, there's this whole plethora
Right.
of religions that are recognized. But if it's not recognized, then no, they can't do anything about starting a new religion or getting groups of people together. It's very, usually there's an officer watching the religious services because that is a time when you get people together who all have, the similar ideas, a similar hate for, the man, that type of stuff.
Right.
We have to be careful that they don't start building that into more of a gang, which a couple of those are listed. Aryan Brotherhood are big.
Right.
Usually. Muslims, they fall under not only a lot of the terrorist stuff and a religion, but they also fall under the gangs too.
Oh, really? I did not know that. That is very interesting.
Morris Science Temple's another one that
Right.
we watch out for.
Now he's going to be on death row, if I understand it. He's pretty well going to be segregated. I mean, he's pretty well just going to be by himself, unless maybe he can come out for maybe religious activities or something like that, right?
Right. Now, more than likely, he'll be side by side with other cells. He'll see people across the hallway, maybe. So it's not complete isolation, but he, as far as touch or anything like that, he won't be able to do that, but he'll be able to see and yell. Sometimes they flush all the water out of the toilet and yell through it back and forth between the cells, and sink pipes and vents, and so they communicate.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think also a lot of people don't realize that prisoners have certain rights.
Mm-hmm.
And as a correctional officer, you folks who are out there on the floor, you guys have to recognize those rights and live and work through that, correct?
Sure, absolutely. And many of those things I talked about with segregation, those aren't just what a prison does. Those are federal laws. They get 3 meals a day, no less than 2. I think it's no less than 2 hot meals. They get access to a shower and cleaning 3 times a week. They get access to new linen exchange once a week. I mean, those are mandated in laws across the nation. So, and they still have some of the rights, that they had when they were on the street. They have a right to free speech as long as it doesn't interfere with their incarceration or cause problems. We have the right to limit that if it was, speech trying to start a riot or something like that. But for them to go into the Alcoholics Anonymous and talk in there or something, we can't limit that as long as it's normal free speech.
Well, now things have changed a little bit since I was out on the street, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And I know today there's a lot of they call them, amendment audits, and they're going out there and today you can go out there and cuss a police officer. You can call him all kinds of names. You can do everything in the world. And you, as a police officer, you just got to sit there and take that because of freedom of speech. Is that the same thing true of a correctional officer? Can they just cuss down a correctional officer and call him everything under the sun and all that sort of thing? And I would imagine that there are probably ways that his life wouldn't be as comfortable if he did that. I don't know. You tell us.
Absolutely. You know, some of your days in a segregation unit, you're walking by 60 cells who all hate you and, you know, calling names, calling you everything in the book, trying to get you to just react. That's all they want. They just want you to react. Know that they got you a little bit. Now you're right. Inmates they're going to get what they have coming by law, but you know, extras besides that, you might get those limited if you're not, you know, acting nice with the officer. He doesn't have to do anything extra, that's for sure. You know, if the book card only comes around on Wednesday, guess what you're not getting on Tuesday if you're a butt.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is some of that. You know, it's tough. You talk about having a person do that. It's really tough having 60 people do that.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what gets to, you know, correctional staff. It beats you down.
No, I can imagine. Yeah.
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 They also, we have the ability, if they're using foul language, if they're doing that kind of stuff, I can write them what we call an incident report or a shot. It's like a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And they can get disciplinary time. They can be put in the segregation. They can lose money off their commissary account. If it's bad enough, if it's something that's bad enough, they can even lose time. And people don't realize that. And it's one of the things I teach correctional officers. You can't just write a shot, because when you start taking somebody's time, you're actually taking something that's given them by the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We're the only people that can, besides a judge, that can actually cause somebody to stay in prison longer. So it's something you have to be careful with. You can't just throw that around out there.
Right.
There are some repercussions, but once you get a guy on death row, what's he got to lose?
Yeah, I hear you. Hey, well, the big day will maybe or may not come for Chad Daybell. My last podcast, I shared some of the misconceptions that people have. You know, number one, it's not cheaper to put somebody to death. It costs more money to put somebody to death. Number two, you know, it doesn't happen soon, right? I mean, he could be on death row for 20 years or more, right?
I think at one time, Texas and Missouri, it was down to like 11 years on some of them, and that's about the quickest it's ever been.
Right.
I don't think it's still there. I did listen to your episode about that, and I do have one thing to say.
What's that?
You didn't mention one reason why it is good to put some of these people down, and that is because you have people who go into prison who have killed people, and now you've got correctional officers who have been put in the line of fire, who are killed across the country. You have other inmates who are killed. A perfect example is an inmate called Clayton Fountain, and he was a Marine who killed his Marine drill sergeant, and they put him in the military, send him over to Leavenworth, and before he died, he had killed an officer, assisted with killing another officer, and had killed 3 other inmates.
Wow.
Now, if they had put him down the first time, all them other people would have been alive. So we don't get rid of them by putting them in jail. People still have to stand there and deal with them and be in danger. And so that was just one thing I wanted to bring up.
You are exactly right on that. I didn't even think about that part of it. You know, the danger, because these guys have got nothing to lose, right? I mean, what talk to, and this happens to me.
Don't worry about it.
Hey, we're here with Mike Cantrell, folks, and boy, what an explosive interview this is. I just really appreciate the insight he's given us into what's happening behind the bars, and it's just tremendous for our true crime fans, because we often see what's happening in the courtroom. We know what's happening in the investigation, but very few times the true crime people realize what's going on behind the bars. Don't you agree, James?
I do agree, yes.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I wanted to ask you, have you ever had, like, you know, at this point, Chad Daybell's known all around the world. Have you had some of those, like, celebrity-type people that you have run into while you've been there behind the bars protecting us?
I have had a lot of them. One of the first ones was I just forgot his name. I'll think of it here. Berdella, out of the Kansas City serial killer.
Wow.
He was the first one I knew of.
Wow.
It was kind of famous and everybody hated. He had killed a bunch of young men, and that was back in Kansas City, I think, back in the 80s. And yeah, he was well hated in Missouri State Pen because of not only the way he talked, but he was allowed to keep. He took Polaroids of his victims while they were being tortured.
Oh, wow.
He was allowed to have copies of those in his legal work. That was done by the judge. And he was a real pompous guy and treated everybody poorly. And so we had to protect him from the inmates, which is always, the crazy part of our job.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something real quick. So one of the strangest things that's ever occurred while I was in prison. So one night he has a heart attack. They take him out to the hospital. I'm working the housing unit. And he dies at the hospital the night Berdella died. And it kind of comes back to the prison. A couple of phone calls are made. People start hearing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Start hearing this. And then it grew and from one housing unit to the next. And then it was inmates and then thousands. And I think before we were done, all 3,000 inmates in that prison were clapping that he was dead.
Is that right?
Wow.
And that was kind of a really eerie thing to just stand there and it lasted for like 5 or 10 minutes.
What kind of treatment do you think that Chad Daybell will get from inmates? I mean, he was responsible for the death of a little 7-year-old and a 13-year-old, and we've always heard, that those guys, that do that kind of stuff with kids, that they have a target on their back. Would that be the same with Chad Daybell?
He won't be in Gen Pop, will he?
No,
he won't be there. But there's always a way to get to him, right?
They try. They absolutely try. That's why we used to have to lock down the prison. Not only Berdella, but many other high-profile ones. You lock down the prison because the inmates will try to hide around the corner and jump them, and some of them want the notoriety, some of them just want to kill them. And I don't know the Chad Daybell deal. There's a morality that goes on in prison that's we don't understand on the outside.
Right.
Killing a child isn't the highest level. Now, sexually assaulting or torturing a child, that's a whole different thing in an inmate's mind.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Interesting.
They're not the same. So he, killing a child, that's not going to be looked upon well. But if it wasn't involved with, raping or torturing or something like that, they may turn more of a blind eye to that. It's not considered quite as bad.
Right. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, I did. I actually was investigating child sex abuse for a couple of years as a special victims investigator, and I realized that connotation among inmates, they kind of all look down on that. Now, yeah, like you said, go out and kill somebody, that's fine, but sexually abuse a child and suddenly, you've got that target on your back. Hey, tell us a little bit about. I know that you would probably know more than any of us, I do, or any of our audience probably. What takes place on that day that they do an execution?
Well, that actually starts a few days before because it's not. It is a large production to have an execution. The people that are going to be there, the invitations go out. It's kind of strange, but there's seating that happens. You can't put certain people around, there's going to be different viewing areas. So
right.
You're figuring out who's going to be there, where you could put them. You're starting to run security. Some of your prison, we call them sort teams, but they may be like SWAT teams or CERT teams. They're going to start planning a few weeks out, for eventualities if somebody's trying to, come protest and stuff like that, or possibly, try to disrupt it in some way. So
how's the team selected? How's the viewers selected? Is it like a lottery or is it?
Oh no, the sort teams and stuff.
No, the viewers. The ones
viewers. No.
Right.
That has to do a lot with who he requests there. There'll be certain witnesses usually that have nothing to do with it. They're there to make sure it's done correctly. Family from the victims can request to be there. And of course, you're going to be careful where you set all these people.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a whole plethora of people that could or would be there. You can sometimes have, political appointees and stuff. that may be there and stuff also. So you never know what you're going to deal with. And then now the day of the execution, usually, well, let's back up. Usually a few days before the execution, they're going to assign 1 or 2 or 3 guards correctional officers who are going to stay with the inmate. And they're probably going to move him to another cell where he's separated from all the other inmates. And a lot of it is just keeping the whole situation calm.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be some visits going on. A lot of times there might be a last visit with a family or something. A lot of people request certain clergy and stuff to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to see some of that. But those officers are going to stay with him for the next couple of days, 24/7. And on the day of the execution, of course, you've all heard of the last meal. At most places that I know of, that's still a thing. It has to be within reason. They're not going to order 7 lobsters, but a steak and a baked potato and a Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen people that requested a Big Mac and fries because they haven't tasted it in 20 years, or a pizza. So you may see some of that on that last day. And the people I've talked to, I've never worked that actual position. People I've talked to said they either become very talkative or they become very quiet. Some of them will just want to talk,
mm-hmm.
and some of them they just don't say anything and they just kind of zone out. And of course, the phone call, that's going to go to the director and the administration are on heightened alert, and they have to be there to take a phone call. And sometimes it's an even bigger deal. The federal executions, we did 3 of them, one right after the other not too long ago, and we actually opened up the National Command Center, and we had a lot of it. We were watching a lot of that stuff from there.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be a big deal. And then, the people I've talked to, that's all I can tell you. I don't know of anybody that's ever fought or anything like that on the way to the execution. Most of the time they've come to a point that this is it, and they're usually pretty congenial and they go do their thing. I will tell you, when I worked for the state of Missouri, we would go stand execution outside of Potosi as part of the team I was with, and it was weird because you'd have protesters and stuff.
Right.
And we were just kind of standing there looking all tough, and providing security. And whenever they'd come out and announce that, at 12:11 so-and-so was pronounced dead, blah, 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 everybody just dropped their head and walk off. And you're still standing there, thinking it's what's going to happen. And nothing ever did. It was just
Wow.
You usually have like 2 groups there, right? You have some that are protesting it, and then you got some who, hey, we want it fried, man.
Most of what I saw was protesting.
Yeah.
But there were always a few of the others who were like,
yeah,
no death penalty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow. Well, this has really been interesting. I appreciate, Mike. I hope you'll let us bring you back again sometime and get some more insight on this. Before we leave, tell us a little more about your podcast and what your goal is in your podcast. I just really, man, I'm so excited and glad that you're there because in my retired time, as you know, I did a little security at the jail, and I had not been around corrections that much, but I just, as you know, most people don't realize correction officers, they really get a bad rep out there, and it shouldn't be that way. These are brave men and women, and I have nothing but admiration for them, and they have a lot of courage to do what they do. And, I just think that your podcast means so much to those men and women who are there to know that somebody's talking about them and sharing about what the life is about. And I think we need more of that. I think the community needs to realize that there's a whole group of heroes, unsung heroes. We have a police officer killed, and I'm so grateful because the community just rushes to the side, and they give us all kinds of support and all that sort of thing. But so often the correctional officer doesn't even get a thank you, So tell us about what you're doing for correctional officers.
when I retired, I wanted to do something, and they call us the forgotten cop, and that's truly what it is. In order for people to, like you said, they go put them on death row, and now I don't have to worry about them anymore. In order to do that, you kind of have to forget the people who are watching. Because
Right.
me walking the 7-Eleven in my uniform, all of a sudden, I just reminded you there's 2,000 bad guys behind the fence over there. And people don't want to think about that, so they kind of forget about us. So I just wanted to, not only make the public aware that we're just normal people, and the number of correctional officers that save lives inside every day across this country is crazy.
Yeah.
But you never see that on newspaper, do you?
No.
Nobody ever talks about that. They're out there working their butts off, doing CPR on inmates, bringing them down when they're hanging. I mean, they've done some amazing things that would be recognized for any other group. And then the other one is I just want to do the podcast so I can say thank you. And here's a pat on the back. If nobody else is doing it, we'll do it for each other. And that's a lot of what I've ran across. I get a lot of, mail coming in, email, thank you for the podcast. I'm glad somebody's talking about this stuff. We're now 67 countries have
amazing.
at least an episode of the Prison Officer Podcast. And I didn't even think about how global corrections is. But every country has somebody sitting in a segment in a broken chair watching somebody
Right.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, one other thing I wanted to say relating to what I've learned about correctional officers, I was astonished when I got inside the jail and was able to work with some of those guys. I've been out there and been on a fight in the middle of a yard sometime, and I just cannot wait to hear those sirens get there and my backup gets there. But I'm telling you, you guys, for backup, it's not half an hour, it's not 20 minutes, it's not a minute for those guys are there. I was just it blew me away when the first code blue I heard. It just blew me away, man. People were running and those guys were there to back up each other, and I am I thought boy, it was something. I thought I was really proud that every now and then I could hear a siren 5 or 7 or 10 minutes later. You guys are there in seconds, man.
You learn it quick.
Yeah.
One of the first things you learn. There is nobody else. It's whoever's inside the fence at that moment. And that camaraderie, that person, that you have to drop everything. And the people who have been at the bottom of the pile when you see them run. The ones that are jogging a little bit, they might be new, haven't had that fight yet.
Yeah.
The guy that's knocking people down on the way to the fight, he's at the bottom of that pile.
Wow.
There's nobody else to help us. It's just us. And we become very dependent on each other, which is a plus, but it also is a detriment, because when we go out in the public, we tend not to. When I used to go to the Boy Scout meetings, my wife would say, "Get out of your correctional officer post."
Oh,
back to the wall, and she'd be like, "You can't act like that out here." That's just who we are. We become that. We become nervous. We watch what people have in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
It's a different world, and it's hard to get rid of.
Well, hey, Mike, thank you for what you're doing. We here at Charlie Crime Buster, we want to salute all the brave men and women in corrections that are out there, and I want to encourage, if you're listening, you are a correctional officer or a police officer or a citizen, Mike's podcast would be very, very valuable to you. So, Mike, tell us how we can get to your podcast. What's the best way for our guys to subscribe and become a part of your family?
Absolutely. www.theprisonofficer.com and at The Prison Officer on YouTube will get you to the podcast. It shows up at both places. Mike at theprisonofficer.com is my email if somebody wants to reach out. And I just want to say before we get off here, thank you, because I do listen to your podcast and I hear how much of a supporter you guys are of law enforcement, and it's not either or. We're all part of the same family. We all
Exactly.
part of the same sandwich. And we appreciate what you do. And since the day I met you and you were telling me that everything that you learned in the jail, I've always appreciated the way you stood up for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. All right, folks, thank you. We've been really honored to have Mike Cantrell with us. And James, let's make sure we put in our show notes these links so that they can
Absolutely.
get right over to Mike's podcast and subscribe. Mike, thank you for being a part of this, and we look forward to having you again sometime real soon to keep us informed on what's happening behind the bars.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mike.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, James, what a great interview that was to hear from Mike Cantrell.
It was a very good interview. A lot of information, a lot of things that you don't know. And, even I didn't know this until like later on in life, that jail is not the same as prison. They are two separate entities. Jail is just a temporary holding place until you're prosecuted, and then you go to prison.
Right, yeah. I've even heard seasoned, newscasters and reporters who should know better who say, this guy's in prison, when he's just in jail.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Same thing. So, yeah, a lot of people get that confused. I'm glad that Mike took time to help us understand that. And, of course, we know now that Chad had been in jail. And, by the way, also, what some people don't realize is you can be in prison, and if you have to come back for another trial, you're going to go back to jail.
Yes.
Because you got to go to that jurisdiction where that happened. Because you got to go back for another trial, so you're usually going to be in a jail when you're in trial. But we know Chad now is gone to prison, and I think that it was good for our folks to know that he's going to be segregated. He's not going to be out there in the population of his own death row.
Right.
And they're certainly going to watch him, and I would not be surprised based on what Mike said, which was very interesting to me, is that he's still going to be able to write those books that he's been writing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And publish those books.
And publish them. Yes.
Perhaps. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's different in different states and everything, but I was wondering about that, if he would be able to continue his cult following, at that point,
I was going to also ask him the question, in which he may be able to, in listening to our podcast, us talking about this, he may be able to respond to this. But if in fact they cannot give him the lethal injection, will he face the firing squad?
Well, what I've read, that's true. The next step is the firing squad if they have a problem with that injection. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know that there was one case that I read not too long ago where a guy was trying his best to demand and request that he gets the firing squad. Some guy wanted to, So I don't know how that goes. If he said, I would rather have the firing squad or not, I don't know whether that would be a part of it. I can't imagine anybody that would rather have that, but, there's some strange folks out there, right?
Yeah, there are some strange people. Yeah.
Yeah, some strange people out there.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting too what he told us about in light of the Ted Bundy ended up having a child in jail, and
right.
That I didn't really know how that worked, because I was, even in my law enforcement career, I was pretty well involved in the jail and not the prison,
mm-hmm.
as they go about it. But I doubt. I think that Idaho is a pretty conservative state, so I doubt that he's going to have that privilege, but hey, who am I? I don't know.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask as a follow-on to the Ted Bundy having a child issue, was when women have children, when they have their conjugal visits.
Yeah,
right?
Conjugal, yeah.
When they have their conjugal visit and they become pregnant, what happens to those children? Are they placed into foster care? Are they given to family members? Or what happens to those children?
I would say it's the same thing that happens, because there are, unfortunately, in this country, there are times when women are actually arrested who are pregnant and given sentences, and they have their child while they're in jail,
Mm-hmm.
So what usually happens in that thing is the same thing as, just like if you lost a parent and suddenly what would happen to you, mostly the social services would, if the person was responsible enough, they would try to find a very close relative to help raise that child, But
right.
if they couldn't, then they would go into the social services deal, and maybe even going into foster care or something like that, or a home
mm-hmm.
or something like that, Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when it comes to Chad Daybell, he was telling us about some of the things that I was interested in, whether they thought they would be a target on his back. And I think from what Mike said, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal for us putting a target on their back, because again, there was not any proven sexual uh, tendencies in this whole thing. In fact, you and I both know that more than likely Chad did not personally kill the kids.
Right.
It was the spiritual hitman that did it. So
Right.
the only other thing I should have followed up on that I didn't is, I have seen and read about certain people in jail that would want to kill somebody like that just for the notoriety
Mhm.
of the fact that they killed that person. You know
But
what
yeah,
I'm saying?
that he was high visibility as it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, some dude in prison who doesn't have a lot to lose and says, "Hey, I want to get famous, so I'll take him out." So
Yeah.
I would say that that Chad Daybell will probably be, for the whole time he's there, somewhat of a security risk. You
Right.
know
Right.
that they're going to have to really watch him closely, and maybe even spend extra money making sure that he's safe. But I mean, anything can happen. I mean, look at what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. You know,
Right. Right.
very 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 high visibility,
Exactly.
and yet there are still people today who don't believe that he committed suicide. They
Right.
believe that there was some something behind the scenes there, that somebody took him out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe that might be another good podcast sometime, right?
It could be. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
in fact, in
Exactly.
fact, we did one on that.
We
Remember?
did. We did do that one.
We've done so many of them. It's hard to remember on it. So Jake, what are you looking forward in the future here for our podcast? What we've been talking about? I think Rust that's coming up.
We have Russ coming up. We have
And
Lori Daybell coming up. And I was
yeah,
just, I was actually sharing with Mike before we went on the air, that fact that there is 15 terabytes of data that the defense attorney has to go through for her case, in addition to 100,000 documents.
wow.
And the hearing that they had just the other day, the attorney told the judge that he's only been through 8,000 of them. So he's going to need a lot of time. And when you look at 15 terabytes, I mean, that's a lot of data.
Yes,
That's a
no
lot
doubt
of
about
data.
it.
And it's probably a lot of pictures, a lot of video, stuff like that. But it's evidence, 15
Yeah,
terabytes of evidence. But
yeah.
100,000 documents? Can you imagine?
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see, because this was Charles Vallow. And it's going to be interesting to me to see how much of this other part of this whole story they bring into Charles Vallow. If it's
Right.
anything like Chad Daybell, they're going to bring the whole story. You know, all
True.
that, everything's going to come in. Just like we saw there. That she was involved in. I don't know how much they'll say that she was involved with Chad with it, but certainly with her and Alex.
Well, she was complicit,
Oh
obviously.
yeah,
She married
yeah.
the guy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The thing that I think blows my mind, and I don't know if you remember the video when the police got there and they were interviewing Alex Cox, who was sitting on the sidewalk, and then Lori drives up after she'd been on her little shopping spree, to get her flip flops
Right.
after
Right.
while her husband was laying dead on the floor of her house.
Right.
And she drives up and she just starts, it's just like another day, and she starts laughing. And so,
Yeah.
oh my, sorry neighbors, like that was a big joke, and
Right.
just, I could not believe that somebody would be so callous that
Right.
they would laugh about it and joke about it. And here is, Charles Vallow laying dead in her living room. It's just incredible to me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is crazy.
yeah. So we got some really, really good things coming down the pike, don't you think?
We do. And also, Scott Peterson came up as well here recently.
Oh yeah, we're gonna take another deep dive into that, because I tell you, if they find DNA on that tape on her pants, and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a brand new ball game.
Brand new ball game. Yep.
Yeah, it's going to be a brand new ball game. At this point, between you and I and our listeners, I know, I guess it's going to be very, very secretive if I say that on the air.
Right. Right.
But between you and I and our listeners, at this point, I'm still convinced he's guilty. But there's
Yeah.
some really, really interesting things there.
There is. There is. Yeah.
So we've got some exciting days ahead for Charlie Crimebuster.
We certainly do. We encourage everyone to listen. I mean,
and subscribe.
And subscribe. Please subscribe. Yes, please subscribe. That's our big mantra right now is for everyone to subscribe. We really need your subscription. We need to build our subscription base. There's more that we want to do for our subscribers as well, in the way of free gifts and offerings and things like that. But we can't do that until YouTube has a restriction. So we can't do it until we have our subscription base up high enough. So and that's the reason why
we're growing.
We're growing, and it's fast.
Amazing, yes.
And it's fast, yeah.
We'll be there.
We're almost there.
But
we're almost there.
Yeah, more than helping us, we want to build the family and bring you into these discussions we're having because they're so fascinating.
Right, and I have to make a disclaimer. I made a comment about the fact that the children being a second degree or even manslaughter. I made the comment, and we had a response to one of our listeners that said that couldn't believe that we made that comment about it being just manslaughter for children. And I wanted to correct that because I was actually speaking on behalf of those that may think that was not understanding the law, not understanding that the prosecutor had asked for first-degree murder on all of it, that there were people out there that were still asking the question, and I was doing it at least as an advocate for listeners that were thinking about it. What is it? Can it in fact have been a manslaughter charge? On any other situation it could have been, but for children, I do agree with our listener the fact that it is in fact a first-degree murder because he was the conspirator.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that.
There was enough evidence there that proved that he was the conspirator.
But you know what I am so happy about is what we say on Charlie Crimebuster all the time, that you can ask questions,
yes.
You can make suggestions, and you can make objections.
And
it is
a
safe.
It is a safe place.
It is a safe place. We want to hear that. And
absolutely.
Sometimes what you're saying to us, it makes us rethink our own.
Exactly.
So thank you for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I did. When I responded to the comment, I thanked them for that, and I told them that I would, in fact, on the air, say that no, we did agree with the jury on this whole thing. We're in fully compliant with the fact that it was a first-degree murder case. But there were still listeners out there that were still thinking, that was, there again. We're talking about a whole spectrum of people that have formed opinions about this whole case.
Sure, yeah.
So they're thinking, well, he wasn't directly involved in those children. So manslaughter probably would have been under any other circumstances. He probably could have gotten by with manslaughter or second degree. But the prosecutor had asked for first degree.
Right.
He had to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was guilty of first degree, and that's what he was prosecuted on, and that was what he was sentenced on.
Exactly. Yep. And
it was
again, we want to thank Mike Cantrell for being our special guest on this program, trying to think about what's happening to Chad Daybell and the days ahead. And we also want to thank all of our listeners that are getting the word out to other people. And please, again, hit that subscribe button. Also, if there's a place for you to hit the notification, hit that, because we'd like for you to be notified the first time we drop something.
Absolutely.
Because we're going to be dropping a whole lot out there. So
we are.
So, James, thank you for your work. And I guess we would say to the folks that, can you remember what I say when we leave?
I can.
How about you take us out?
All right. We want to remind everyone to be safe, be alert, for the life you save may be your very own.
I love it, James. Bye, everybody. See you next time.
Okay, thanks. You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.